A lonely rancher bought a family of 7, a settler mother and her 6 children, including a newborn, from cruel in-laws. Then they said, "Please marry our mother." The sky hung low and bruised over the town of Cold Creek, the early spring wind carrying the sour breath of thawed mud and horse sweat. The square was alive with noise, hoarse laughter, boots on splintered boards, and the hollow clang of a bell calling men to the makeshift platform. The auction had drawn a crowd. Folks always came when desperation was being sold cheap. A young woman stood at the center of it all, her dress torn where the shoulder seam had given out, her face pale beneath strands of wind-blown brown hair. In her arms, a newborn swaddled in a frayed blanket whimpered faintly. 6 children huddled near her skirt, thin, mud-stained, eyes wide and hollow from hunger. The youngest clutched her sleeve. The eldest boy, maybe 12, stood between them and the men who sneered from below. "Sold to the highest bidder," barked the auctioneer, a lanky man with whiskey breath and a crooked hat. "One woman, named Ruth and Mallory, and 6 brats. Her husband's dead. Her keepers can't feed her. Let's not waste daylight. Who'll start the bid?" Laughter rolled through the crowd, low and mean. At the edge of the square, Eli Mercer watched from beneath the brim of his hat. He'd come into town only for supplies, a coil of rope, feed for his mare, but something about the sound in that woman's silence held him still. He had the look of a man who'd once been feared and now wished to be forgotten. Tall, broad-shouldered, coat faded by sun and time, the mark of an old scar just visible near his temple. His right hand, gloved in worn leather, stayed close to the belt where a revolver hung idle, a relic from years he refused to speak of. $5, someone jeered. "I'll take the older 2 for chores." "10 for the lot," said another voice. "Could use the boys for the stables." The in-laws, 2 thick-necked men with cruel eyes, stood nearby, smirking, passing a flask between them. One of them leaned toward Ruth and hissed loud enough for all to hear. "Better hope someone's kind enough to feed them, girl. You ain't got nothing left." Ruth said nothing. Her jaw was set, and the newborn whimpered again against her chest. Eli's pulse ticked once, slow and deliberate. He'd seen hunger before. He'd seen cruelty too, the kind that dressed itself in law and laughter. A memory flickered. A saloon floor, 3 men dead. His hand shaking afterward as though the weight of the gun had finally turned against him. The auctioneer raised his arm. 15. Do I hear 20? The older in-law shoved Ruth forward so hard she stumbled, nearly dropping the baby. "Stand straight," he barked. The sound that followed wasn't loud. It was the soft metallic click of Eli's boot heel against the step as he moved forward through the crowd. The men turned as he approached, parting instinctively. "I'll pay 30, Eli said, his voice rough as gravel. Silence rippled outward. The auctioneer hesitated. $30? For all of them? Eli's eyes lifted. Gray, cold, unblinking. "All of them," he said. "And you'll hand them over clean." The older in-law spat to the side. "You don't know what you're buying, Mercer. She's cursed trouble, half mad with grief. Those kids'll starve you dry." Eli's gaze flicked toward him once. "Then I'll die fed." The man started to argue, but Eli reached into his coat and dropped a small leather pouch onto the crate. The dull clink of silver cut through the murmurs. $30, Eli repeated. The auctioneer swallowed, counted quick, and nodded. "Sold." Ruth blinked like someone waking from a long sleep. The children froze. The eldest boy stared at Eli, searching his face for cruelty and finding none. The in-laws moved to block his way, but Eli didn't slow. He stepped forward until the shadow of his coat swallowed them both. "You've been paid," he said, voice quiet but final. "That means it's done." Something in his tone made the older brother step back. Eli turned to Ruth Ann. "You've got a wagon?" She shook her head. "Then you ride with me." The words weren't an offer. They were a shelter shaped like a command. They left the town under a curtain of drizzle, the wagon creaking as Eli guided the mare eastward. The road ran through meadows where the last snow clung to the shaded hollows. The children sat close, wrapped in blankets he'd thrown from the back. Ruth Ann held the baby tight, her gaze fixed on the horizon, on nothing. Hours passed. The air smelled of rain and pine sap. Eli didn't speak. He'd never known how to speak to pain that wasn't his. He only watched the road ahead and the way her hands trembled around the child. Near dusk, the sound came, hooves behind them, closing fast. He looked back, eyes narrowing. 2 riders. The in-laws. Ruth Ann saw them too. Her breath caught. "Stay down," Eli said quietly. He stopped the wagon by a fallen oak, stepped down, and loosened the strap of his revolver. The men slowed as they neared, grinning, one raising a rifle. "You think you can buy blood, Mercer?" the older called. "She's ours. We ain't done." Eli's coat moved with the wind. "You sold her. You're done." The man aimed. Eli didn't warn him twice. The Colt came up once, the hammer clicked, and the rifle exploded from the man's hands before the sound even reached them. The shot cracked the valley air, sharp and final. The second rider froze, eyes wide. "Pick up your friend," Eli said, "and ride home." They did. When the sound of hooves faded into the trees, Eli reloaded with slow precision, holstered the weapon, and climbed back to the driver's seat. The children stared in stunned silence. Ruth Ann's lips parted, as if to ask who he was, but she didn't. She simply turned her face away and held her baby tighter. They drove until the night turned blue and still. The lantern on the wagon cast soft light on their faces, mud-streaked, weary, human. At last, on the crest of a ridge, his ranch came into view. A small cabin of weathered wood, smoke curling faintly from the chimney, a corral beside it where horses shifted in the dark. He stopped the wagon there, the wind colder now, carrying the scent of wet grass and distant thunder. Ruth Ann spoke for the first time, voice hoarse from hours of silence. "Why would you do that for strangers?" Eli stared ahead, jaw tight. "Didn't do it for thanks," he said. "Just couldn't watch no more." She turned toward him then, studying the rough lines of his face, the scar near his temple, the steady way his hands rested on the reins. Something in her expression softened, uncertainty giving way to the smallest thread of trust. He guided the wagon down the slope. The rain came again, lighter this time, washing the dust from the air. The cabin's lantern glowed warm in the dark, a promise he hadn't meant to make but couldn't undo. The children stirred, whispering questions he didn't answer. The baby whimpered once, then quieted. Eli glanced at Ruth and then ahead again. "You'll sleep safe tonight," he said. Her reply was barely a whisper, carried away by the wind. "Safe's a word I ain't heard in years." The horses pressed forward through the mist. Behind them, far off in the dark, thunder rolled across the plains like a slow-coming reckoning. Eli's hand brushed the revolver at his side. He didn't look back, but he knew. Trouble wasn't done following them. Not yet. And in the dim lantern light, the woman beside him finally closed her eyes, holding her child as if the world had stopped chasing for one breath too long. The first dawn at Eli Mercer's ranch rose pale and trembling, as though unsure it had the right to touch that lonely stretch of earth. The hills still wore streaks of thawed snow, and the creek behind the barn hissed with the sound of cold water fighting to be free. Inside the cabin, silence reigned, soft, uncertain, human. Ruth Ann woke first. For a moment she didn't know where she was. The scent of pine smoke, the creak of timber, the faint warmth of the hearth, all of it felt foreign and fragile. The baby stirred in her arms, pressing his tiny mouth against her wrist. She sat up slowly from the cot, her back aching, the quilt rough beneath her palms. The last thing she remembered was the long ride through rain and thunder, the stranger's steady hands guiding the wagon, the feeling that maybe, just maybe, the ground beneath her wasn't about to give way. Across the room, Eli stood at the stove, pouring coffee into a tin cup. His shoulders filled the small space, the kind of frame that looked built to bear other people's storms. He didn't turn when she stirred. "There's biscuits on the table," he said, his voice a low rumble that somehow felt softer than it should. "Ain't much, but they're warm." She hesitated. The children were still asleep on the floor, curled under borrowed blankets, their small chests rising and falling like waves. One of the girls had a hand tangled in her sister's hair. The eldest boy had a boot tucked beneath his head like a pillow. Ruth moved quietly, checking each of them, then stood. Her bare feet met the cold floorboards. Eli slid the tin cup toward her without looking up. "There's sugar too," he said. She took it, unsure why her hands trembled. "Thank you," she murmured. He only nodded. Outside, the wind pressed against the cabin walls like a restless animal. The day carried the smell of wet wood and horses. Ruth stepped to the window. From there she could see the land spreading wide and empty. Rolling pasture, a line of pines, the fence mended in places with rope instead of wire. It was the sort of solitude that could either heal a soul or bury it. By mid-morning, the children were awake. The littlest girl, a freckled thing of 6, clung to her mother's skirts, staring at Eli as though he were part man, part mountain. The older boy, Jacob, tried to look braver than he felt. Eli handed him a tin plate piled with beans. "Eat," he said. The boy took it carefully, muttering a quiet thank you. They ate in silence. Ruth's eyes kept drifting toward the door, toward the outside world that still felt dangerous. Every creak of wood, every gust of wind sounded like a threat returning. Eli noticed, but said nothing. He simply moved through the morning with the deliberate patience of a man used to fixing things quietly, tending to the fire, hauling water from the creek, feeding the mare that had carried them all night. By afternoon, sunlight began breaking through the clouds, cutting thin gold lines across the cabin floor. Ruth washed the baby's blanket in the tin basin and hung it near the fire. Her hands worked by instinct. Eli passed behind her to reach a shelf, the faint scent of pine and leather trailing after him. She stiffened but didn't move away. "You can use that room there," he said finally, gesturing toward the back. "Wasn't used in years. Roof leaks when it rains. I'll patch it tomorrow." She nodded. "You didn't have to bring us here." He paused, his back turned. "Couldn't leave you there. Men've done worse," she said quietly. He looked at her then, really looked, the bruise near her temple fading to yellow, the defiant way she kept her chin high even while afraid. Something inside him shifted. He wanted to tell her she didn't have to be so ready for pain, but he didn't have the words. Instead, he picked up his coat. "I'll check the fences." The door closed softly behind him. Ruth watched him cross the yard, boots sinking in the thawed earth. The children followed him with their eyes, whispering to one another. There was something about the way he moved, steady, quiet, never wasting motion, that made even the smallest ones trust him. The next few days blurred into rhythm. Morning chores, simple meals, nights by the fire. Eli worked the ranch alone while the children helped where they could. He never raised his voice, not once. He spoke in small instructions: how to stack wood, where to pour feed, how to stay away from the creek after dark. The children obeyed, half out of gratitude, half out of awe. Ruth tried to repay him in little ways: washing dishes, mending clothes, cooking what little they had. The first time she reached for his plate, he hesitated before handing it over, as if unsure how to accept kindness. The second time, he didn't hesitate at all. One evening, a spring storm rolled over the hills, wind slamming against the shutters. The youngest children cried, clutching at their mother. Eli lit the lanterns and checked the windows, his movements calm. When lightning struck close, the baby screamed. Without thinking, Eli took the child into his arms. He walked the floor, whispering something low and steady until the crying stopped. Ruth watched him, breath caught in her throat. No one had ever held her children like that, not even their father. Later, after the thunder faded, she found him outside beneath the porch overhang, smoking. The air smelled of rain and tobacco. She stepped beside him, wrapping her shawl tighter. "You've done more for us than I can say," she said softly. He flicked ash into the mud. "Don't owe me words. I want to give them anyway." He looked out at the horizon, where the storm clouds broke apart, revealing a strip of silver moonlight. "You can't pay back mercy," he said after a moment. "You can only pass it on." She studied him quietly, trying to see the man beneath the silence. There was something haunted in his stillness, an old pain that didn't have a name. She didn't ask. She knew the shape of regret when she saw it. Days passed, and the cabin began to sound less empty. The children laughed again. Ruth Ann's hands found purpose in sewing torn shirts, mending what could be mended. Eli brought home a small box from town. Inside it, a music box with a cracked lid. When he wound it, a slow, fragile tune filled the air. The children gathered close, eyes wide. Ruth Ann froze where she stood. That melody, her mother used to hum it while baking. Her throat tightened. Eli noticed. He set the box gently on the table. "Didn't mean to bring ghosts," he said. She shook her head. "Some ghosts ain't so cruel." For a long moment, they stood there, the melody winding down into silence. That night, when the children slept, Ruth Ann lingered by the fire. Eli sat across from her, carving a piece of wood into something shapeless. The flames threw light across his face, revealing lines of wear and a softness he tried to hide. "Why'd you buy us?" she asked finally. He didn't look up. "Because no one else should own a family." The words hung between them, quiet and sure. She wanted to thank him, but instead she whispered, "You speak like a man who's lost more than he'll tell." He set down the carving, eyes lifting to meet hers. "And you live like someone who survived what she shouldn't have." Neither spoke after that. The fire popped once, soft as breath. Outside, the first frogs began to sing near the creek. Inside, the cabin felt warmer than it had any right to be. Before she turned in, Ruth uncovered the sleeping children and looked once more at Eli, at the man who had given her a roof without asking for anything in return. She realized then what frightened her most wasn't the past catching up, it was the idea of believing in safety again. Eli banked the fire and stood. "Tomorrow, I'll fix that roof," he said. She nodded, but her gaze lingered on him. "You're a good man, Mr. Mercer." He gave a faint, almost pained smile. "Don't call me that till I've earned it." When she finally lay down beside the baby, the wind outside had stilled. For the first time in years, she didn't dream of running. Across the room, Eli watched the fire fade, the light drawing slow lines across her sleeping face. Something old stirred inside him, something dangerous in its gentleness. He turned away, jaw tight. Through the window, a wolf howled far off in the hills. Eli listened to it echo and whispered to no one, "Peace never lasts long out here." And as dawn began to bleed across the horizon, a dark shape rode along the far ridge, too distant to name, but watching. The thaw came slow that spring, turning the land into a patchwork of mud and newborn green. Days stretched longer, the sun clinging to the sky as if reluctant to let go of what warmth it had left to give. On Eli Mercer's ranch, the silence had begun to sound different. Not hollow anymore, but full, as though the walls had learned to breathe again. Yet beneath that calm, a shadow stirred, patient as a snake beneath stone. Ruth Ann had begun to find her rhythm in the small, ordinary mercies of the place. She hung laundry on the line, the wind tugging it gently like a child's hand. The children played near the creek, their laughter scattering the silence that had once haunted the hills. Eli worked the fields, repairing fences, mending tack, and cutting logs with a slow precision that came from a man who measured his life in second chances. But even as days softened, Ruth Ann never let herself fully exhale. She'd glance toward the ridge sometimes, eyes narrowing, as though expecting the world to come back for what it had lost. The bruise on her temple had faded, but the fear beneath her skin had not. One evening, after supper, she sat on the porch with the baby in her lap. The horizon burned gold and violet, the kind of beauty that never apologized for being brief. Eli stepped out with his coffee and leaned against the post beside her. For a long time, they watched the sky without speaking. "Used to sit like this with my husband," she said quietly, "before he died." Eli didn't move. "He was a rancher?" She shook her head. "Tried to be. He wasn't made for it. Too proud to learn, too quick to drink. His brothers ran the place. When he died, well, they said I owed them everything he'd borrowed. I told them I had nothing left to give. Turns out they found something anyway." Her voice didn't waver, but her fingers tightened around the baby's blanket. Eli's jaw flexed. "And you stayed." "I had nowhere else to go. They said they'd keep us till I earned our keep." She gave a dry laugh that carried no humor. They called it charity. He looked away toward the fence line, where the wind bent the grass flat. That wasn't charity. No, she said softly. It was punishment. The air hung thick with memory. The sound of the creek seemed louder. Eli took a slow sip from his cup. If they come again. She cut him off. They will. He met her gaze then, gray eyes steady but unreadable. Then I'll be ready. The baby stirred, fussing softly. She rocked him, humming a low tune that trembled at the edges. When she glanced back at Eli, something in his expression had shifted. Less like a man ready for war, more like someone remembering what it felt like to protect something other than himself. Over the next days, the wind changed. Strangers rode through town asking quiet questions about a woman with 6 children and a gunslinger with a scar near his eye. A storekeep told them Eli had gone soft, living honest now. Another man, half drunk, whispered, "Soft don't mean slow." The rumor reached the sheriff, who didn't much like the thought of getting between Mercer and trouble. He sent a note up the ridge, no signature, just 5 words scrawled in pencil, "They're coming for her soon." Eli read it by lantern light, jaw tightening. He folded the paper once and tossed it into the fire. The flames curled it black without sound. That night, sleep wouldn't take him. He sat by the window, watching the moonlight spread silver across the fields. Inside, the children slept on the floor, their soft breathing a rhythm he hadn't realized he'd grown used to. Ruth stirred once, whispering in her dreams. Her face looked peaceful, but the kind that comes only after too much pain, a stillness built on exhaustion. He remembered the years before the quiet, the gun smoke, the cards, the towns that cheered his name before they feared it. Mercer's Lightning, they'd called him once. He used to think he'd left that man in Kansas, buried under the bodies of those who deserved what they got. But now, watching her sleep, he knew the truth. That man hadn't died. He'd only been waiting. At dawn, Eli saddled his horse and rode into town. The children watched from the fence, their faces pale with unspoken questions. Ruth didn't stop him, she only said, "Be careful." The main street looked smaller than he remembered. The saloon still leaned to one side. Men turned their heads as he passed, recognizing something they'd hoped never to see again. He bought supplies, ammunition, feed, salt, and as he paid, the shopkeeper leaned close. "Heard talk, Mercer," the man whispered. "The Mallory boys. They're drinkin' mean, gatherin' hands. Say you stole their kin. Sheriff won't lift a finger." Eli nodded once. "Then I'll keep mine on the trigger." He rode back by dusk, his coat dusted in gold light. When he dismounted, Ruth stood in the doorway. "They're coming, aren't they?" she asked. He didn't answer, just handed her a small bundle of cartridges. "Keep these near the fire." That evening, he took the oldest boy, Jacob, outside to teach him how to aim the rifle. The sun had nearly gone, painting the hills in dying light. "Stand firm," Eli said. "Don't close your eyes. The world don't stop when you blink." Jacob swallowed hard, lining up the shot. The rifle cracked, echoing across the valley. A tin can flew from the fence post. The boy stared at it, shocked by his own power. Eli rested a hand on his shoulder. "A gun's like a promise, boy. Don't make it unless you're ready to keep it." From the porch, Ruth watched, her arms crossed tight around herself. She hated the sight of the weapon, but knew the world wouldn't spare them its lessons. That night, rain came in sheets. The roof dripped in slow rhythm. The fire burned low. Ruth sat mending a shirt by lamplight while Eli cleaned his revolver on the table. The children slept nearby, the baby nestled in a basket by the hearth. She glanced at him. "You said you'd left it behind," she murmured. He didn't look up. Sometimes the past finds its own way home. The storm rumbled, shaking the window panes. Ruth's eyes fell to his hands, steady, practiced, sure. The hands of a man who'd done this too many times. "You don't have to fight my ghosts," she whispered. He gave a faint, almost sad smile. "Ma'am, that's the only kind I know how to fight." Lightning flashed, revealing his face in stark white light. For an instant, She saw the old version of him, the killer, the man with nothing to lose. But when the light faded, only Eli remained, weary but resolute. The rain eased toward morning. The fields gleamed wet and silver beneath the rising sun. Ruth opened the door to let in the scent of wet earth. She turned to thank him for the firewood he'd stacked by the wall, but stopped. He wasn't there. His bed was empty, his coat gone, revolver missing from its peg. She stepped outside, heart pounding. The children were still asleep, unaware. The mare was gone from the corral. On the table inside lay a single note in his rough handwriting. Stay inside. Don't open the door till you hear my voice. Her hand trembled as she folded it. Beyond the ridge, a crow cried once, distant and sharp. She looked toward the horizon and saw what the morning light was revealing. Dust, far off, rising from the road. They were coming. Dawn came red as an open wound, seeping over the hills like a warning. The air smelled of wet iron and pine, and every sound carried too far. The groan of the barn door, the caw of distant crows, the creak of Eli Mercer's saddle as he rode toward the ridge. He'd been up all night sharpening his knife, oiling the revolver, pacing the dirt floor while Ruth watched in silence. Now, with the storm clouds rolling east and a bitter wind rising, it was time. The dust plume on the horizon had grown larger. 7 riders, maybe 8, their silhouettes dark against the brightening sky. He could see the lead horse already. Big, chestnut, mean. That'd be Levi Mallory, the elder brother. The one who did the talking while others did the hurting. Eli's jaw worked slow, chewing nothing, eyes steady as the dawn swallowed the last of the stars. He dismounted at the edge of the field, tied his horse behind a cluster of bare willows, and walked the rest of the way. His boots sank deep in thawed mud. Every step felt like stepping deeper into something that wouldn't forgive mistakes. Behind him, the cabin sat quiet. Smoke curled from the chimney, thin, careful. Inside, Ruth had locked the door and loaded the rifle he'd left her. The children were awake but silent. The eldest boy stood by the window, his small hand trembling near the trigger. Ruth's heart pounded with each hoofbeat echoing through the valley. She wanted to call Eli back, to stop him before the world swallowed him whole again. But she didn't. She knew he wasn't walking toward violence. He was walking toward peace, even if he had to carve it out of hell to get there. By the time the riders reached the lower pasture, Eli was waiting by the split fence. His hat brim shadowed his eyes, his coat open, the revolver loose at his side. The men slowed. Laughter trickled through them like rot. "Well," Levi called, grinning wide enough to show a gold tooth. "The ghost himself. Mercer. Didn't think you'd come out to greet us." Eli's voice was even. "You rode a long way. Say your piece." "We came for what's ours," the man sneered. "That woman, those brats, they belong to us. You think a handful of silver changes that?" "They belong to no man," Eli said. The laughter died. Levi leaned forward in the saddle. "You got gall talkin' like a preacher. Heard stories about you. Said you killed 12 men in Kansas. Said you ain't been right since." Eli's eyes lifted, calm and empty. "Then you ought to know what happens when men don't quit talkin'." For a moment, nothing moved but the wind. A hawk circled above, its shadow gliding over the grass. Then Levi spat. "Kill him." The world snapped. Hooves thundered. Gunfire cracked the air. Eli dropped to one knee behind the fence, firing once, twice, each shot clean, unhurried. One rider fell, another spun sideways with a scream. The sound echoed through the valley, sharp as the tearing of cloth. Ruth heard it and clutched the baby tighter. Eli moved like he'd never forgotten how. Each motion deliberate, a memory waking from long sleep. He shot the man trying to flank him, the bullet tearing through the man's shoulder and spinning him from the saddle. Smoke and mud thickened the air. But for every man he dropped, 2 more pressed in. A bullet grazed his arm, another split the ground near his boot. He rolled behind the fence post, reloading with fingers steady as a clock. When he rose, Levi was nearly on him, pistol drawn, teeth bared. Eli fired first. The bullet shattered the man's pistol, flinging metal and blood into the air. Levi's horse reared, screaming, and threw him. The others faltered, staring between the gunmen and their fallen leader. "You can turn around," Eli said, voice carrying through smoke and rain. "Ain't no shame in leavin', while you still can." But hatred's a blind thing. One of the riders charged, shouting, firing wild. The shot caught Eli in the shoulder. He staggered, fell to one knee. Ruth saw it from the window. The world narrowed to that single sight, Eli's body jerking under the hit, blood blooming through his coat. Without thinking, she grabbed the rifle and pushed open the door. The wind hit her like a slap. "Stay inside!" she shouted to the children, but her voice broke. She ran through the mud, barefoot, hair whipping across her face. Eli looked up just in time to see her take position behind the wagon, eyes blazing. "Ruth and..." She fired. The sound cracked like the sky itself. The bullet struck the rider square in the chest. The man toppled from his horse, a rag doll against the wet earth. For a moment, even the wind seemed to stop. Eli stared at her through the haze, mud-smeared, trembling, fierce. Something inside him, the part that still believed in redemption, stirred again. Two riders fled, spurred by fear. But Levi, half-conscious and bleeding, crawled through the mud toward his fallen pistol. Eli saw the glint, raised his revolver, and hesitated. He could end it. One squeeze, one sound, and the ghost of his past would fall quiet again. But then he heard Ruth Ann's voice, sharp with rage and mercy both. "Don't," she called. "Don't let him turn you into what they said you were." Her voice cracked on the last word, but it was enough. Eli lowered the gun. "You've done all the dying you're gonna do," he said to Levi, stepping closer. "Now you live knowing she don't fear you no more." Levi spat blood, face twisted. "You think this is over?" Eli holstered the gun, eyes cold. "It is for you." Levi lunged, knife flashing. Ruth Ann screamed. Eli turned, too late to draw, but not too late to fight. The blade slashed across his coat, grazing ribs. He caught Levi's wrist, twisted hard, driving the knife into the mud. They grappled, breath and blood and rain mixing into one. Then Jacob's voice broke through it all, high, terrified, certain. "Let him go." The boy stood near the barn, rifle in his shaking hands. Levi froze, just for a second too long. Eli used that second. He slammed the man's head into the mud, once, twice, until the struggle stopped. Silence fell again. The only sound was the creek running over stones, tireless and old. Eli stood, chest heaving, blood streaking his arm. Ruth Ann ran to him, dropping the rifle, hands reaching for his face, his wound, his steadiness. "You're hurt," she whispered. "Not bad," he said, though his shirt was red. "It's done." She looked at the field, bodies sprawled in mud, smoke curling into the air, the faint hum of spring insects already returning to claim the quiet. "It'll never be done," she murmured. He took her hand. "Maybe not. But they won't come again." The children came running then, crying, clinging to their mother's dress, to Eli's legs, to anything alive. The youngest boy pointed to the ridge. "They're gone, Mama. They're really gone." Ruth Ann gathered them close. Her breath came in shudders. Then she looked up at Eli, the man who had saved them and nearly lost himself doing it. His eyes were softer now, washed clean by the storm. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. He looked toward the cabin, smoke still rising steady from the chimney. "Now we live." Days later, when the sun returned for good, they buried the dead at the far edge of the property, where the grass grew wild and the earth forgave easily. Ruth Ann laid a small wooden cross in the dirt, not for mercy, but for closure. The children helped fill the graves, silent and sure. That evening, the sky turned amber and wide. Eli sat on the porch, arm bound, hat low over his eyes. Ruth Ann stepped out, her hands still rough from the shovel. The baby cooed against her shoulder. The oldest girl spoke first, timid but hopeful. "Mr. Mercer?" He looked up. "Will you marry our mama?" We heard you used to fix broken things. The air stilled. Ruth froze, eyes darting to him, half in shock, half in fear. Eli said nothing for a long time. Then he stood, walked down the steps, and rested his hand gently on the child's head. Some things, he said softly, ain't meant to be fixed. They're meant to be lived with till they turn beautiful again. Ruth Ann's breath caught. He turned to her, voice low. But if she'll have me, I'll stay. Her answer was a whisper lost in the wind, but he heard it all the same. Far off, the ridge glowed gold in the dying light, the land quiet once more. And as the children laughed for the first time in months, Eli looked toward the horizon and thought, for the first time in years, that maybe peace was something a man could earn. Now, the narrator's voice softened, click the story beside this one. It's even wilder than this. You'll feel the thunder of the West in your bones. Go on. I'll be waiting at the next campfire.